Economic inequality. It's a topic that gets everybody talking, right? So many opinions flying around. But what's the real story? In this explainer, we're going to cut right through all that noise and look at the actual data behind the widening gap between the rich and, well, pretty much everyone else. All right, let's kick things off with a number that's, honestly, it's pretty hard to wrap your head around. 5 billion. Since just 2020, that's how many people around the world have gotten poorer. I mean, think about that. It's a massive, devastating step backward for a huge chunk of humanity. Okay, but here's the flip side of that coin. In the exact same period that 5 billion people were losing ground, the world's 5 richest men, they saw their fortunes double. Yeah, you heard that right, double. It's like we're living in 2 completely different economic worlds at the exact same time. So how do you even comprehend that much money? Well, Oxfam came up with this pretty wild analogy. Get this. If each of those 5 guys decided to spend $1 million every single day, it would take them 476 years to burn through their cash. 476 years. It's a scale of wealth that's it's almost beyond imagination. All right, so we see this massive divide. But before we can really dig into why it's happening, we got to make sure we're all on the same page. Let's break down what we're actually talking about here. First things first, economic inequality itself. Now, this isn't just about how much money you make in your paycheck, that's your income. It's also about your wealth. And wealth is the whole shebang, everything you own, like a house or stocks, minus all your debts. The gap we're talking about is in both of these things. Then you've got what's called absolute poverty. And this is the really severe stuff. This is when someone literally lacks the basic things they need to survive and have a decent life. You know, things we might not even think about, like clean water, food, a safe place to live, or basic healthcare. And on the other hand, there's relative poverty. This one's a little different. It's all about where you stand compared to everyone else in your society. So you might have food and a roof over your head, but you don't have the resources to, say, be a full part of your community. It creates this other kind of disadvantage, you know? Okay, so we've got our definitions down. We know what this inequality looks like. Now for the big question, the one that really matters. Why? Why does it even exist? So why the huge gap? Well, sociologists have a few different ways of looking at this. They don't all agree on one single answer, but they give us some really powerful ways to understand the forces at play here. First up, we've got the structural functionalist perspective. Now, this theory asks a pretty provocative question. Is it possible that inequality actually serves some kind of purpose in society? It's a tricky one, and the answers aren't simple. So from this point of view, things like unequal pay can actually be useful. The idea is, if you pay a brain surgeon a lot more than a cashier, it motivates smart people to go through all those years of brutal training for a super important job. This theory also points out that poverty can have some weird functions, like creating a market for used cars or secondhand clothes. But, and this is a big but, it also sees the dysfunction. That's when the system fails, when institutions don't provide good jobs or education, and that leads to poverty that ends up hurting everyone. Okay, theory number 2, the conflict perspective. This one isn't about function at all. Nope, this is all about power. It sees inequality as a straight-up struggle between different groups, where one powerful group basically dominates the other. This perspective really has its roots in Karl Marx's ideas about the owners, the bourgeoisie, and the workers, the proletariat. The theory goes that the owners rigged the whole system to benefit themselves. And in today's world, that means the super wealthy use their money and influence to shape laws and policies. Think of something like the Citizens United Supreme Court ruling. This leads to what some sociologists call welfare, which is basically welfare for the rich, stuff like fancy tax breaks and loopholes that only they can use. And for our third theory, we're going to switch gears completely. This is the symbolic interactionist perspective, and this one is all about culture and the power of labels. It's about how we as a society define what rich and poor even mean. You see, this theory says that the labels we stick on people really matter. Think about it. The poor are often stereotyped as lazy or irresponsible, maybe even undeserving. Meanwhile, the wealthy are often seen as smart, capable, hardworking, and deserving of their success. These aren't just words. These labels can actually shape public policy and how we treat people, which just ends up reinforcing the whole cycle of inequality. Okay, so we've got these 3 big ideas on the table. Now let's bring it back down to earth and look at some cold, hard data from right here in the United States. And believe me, the numbers tell a pretty clear story. Just look at this chart. It's wild. Between 1978 and 2022, the pay for CEOs at the biggest companies shot up by over 1,200%. 1,200%. Now, what about the average worker in that same time? Their pay went up by just 15%. I mean, the difference between those two growth rates is just absolutely massive. And no surprise, that massive gap in pay leads directly to a massive gap in wealth. By 2022, the top 1% of Americans owned more than a third of the entire country's wealth. If you look at the top 10%, they controlled over 70% of everything. That leaves less than 30% for the other 90% of us. Just let that sink in. The data also shows us some pretty stark differences when we look at race and ethnicity. In 2022, the median income for a non-Hispanic white household was about $81,000. For Hispanic households, that number drops to under $63,000. And for Black households, it was just over $53,000. That's a huge gap that really points to some deep structural issues. So when you see numbers like that, the next question is pretty obvious, right? What do we do about it? Let's take a look at some of the main strategies people have proposed to try and address this imbalance. Yeah, there are a few big ideas that come up a lot. One is progressive tax reform, the basic idea that the more you earn, the higher percentage you pay in taxes. Another big one is raising the minimum wage to what people call a living wage, enough so that working full-time can actually support a family. A third idea is closing all those corporate tax loopholes and stopping companies from hiding their money in tax havens. And finally, a lot of people say we have to tackle political reform to get a handle on the huge influence that big money has on our elections. All right, so to wrap this all up, let's step back from the charts and the numbers for a second. I want you to just imagine something. Imagine a world where absolute poverty, that lack of basic human needs, was just gone, wiped out. What would that even look like? What kind of ripple effects would that have on things like crime or our health or even global conflicts? It's a really big idea for sure, but it's one that's absolutely worth thinking about.